Elementary school student Timmy deliberately reported a false fire alarm just to see his father, who was a firefighter. But when his father Mike rushed to the school, he took him straight to the girls' restroom, where Mike was stunned by what he saw. Lying there was 13-year-old Janie, with a belly as big as a watermelon, about to give birth.
Oh my God. Well, Dad.
The firefighters were all in shock. This was definitely the wildest case of their careers. Janie was in so much pain that she was sweating profusely and begged the firefighters not to tell her mother. The firefighters didn't agree immediately but first covered her with a blanket and began checking her condition. Suddenly, they realized the baby was about to be born. There was no choice but to persuade the girl.
I feel comfortable talking to your parents, but maybe there's a teacher or the principal.
That's the problem. Her mom is the principal.
Janie said that her mother, who was the principal, only cared about other children, and only gave her a glance when her grades were poor. So much so that her mother didn't even notice she was pregnant for 10 months. At this point, Timmy spoke up for the girl, but his words made Deke's heart sink. "You little brat, did you get this girl pregnant?"
Oh, gosh, Dad, no.
No, I have a boyfriend, but he isn't here today.
No sooner had he finished speaking than Janie suddenly let out a loud scream. It seemed the baby couldn't wait any longer. They had to deliver the baby immediately. So they called the captain to fetch the first aid kit from the ambulance. But the captain said that after confirming the school had falsely reported a fire, they had sent the ambulance back.
Oh,
No first aid kit for childbirth? This is straight up hell mode. To make matters worse, the new ambulance wouldn't arrive for another 10 minutes. But Janie couldn't wait any longer. Nikki switched to childbirth coaching mode. But Janie refused to cooperate due to the intense pain, even getting angry and shouting that she didn't want to give birth. With no other options, Nikki started singing nursery rhymes on the spot, finally calming the furious Janie down. Amidst Janie's heart-wrenching screams, the baby was born. When the firefighters saw the baby's condition, they all gasped in shock. The baby was still wrapped in the amniotic sac. What's worse, the baby inside wasn't moving at all.
Oh God, did I kill it? It was my baby dead.
Just then, the baby twitched slightly, and everyone rejoiced the baby was alive. However, they had to deliver him immediately. Without medical tools, they could only use their fingers to. After some effort, they finally tore open the amniotic sac. They then found a straw to help clear the baby's mouth of meconium. Their efforts were not in vain. The baby opened his eyes and let out a loud, clear cry. Janie took the baby, but her face was filled with anxiety, unsure of how to explain this to the mother. However, the arrival of the ambulance had alerted Principal Davis, who insisted on coming to see what had happened. But the scene before her eyes left Davis stunned.
Are you okay? Are you in pain?
It was only at that moment that Davis realized how inadequate she was as a mother. Fortunately, her daughter was fine, and she still had a chance to make it up to her. Just as this family drama came to an end, the next battle with the bees was already underway. A large truck loaded with beehives collided and overturned. Instantly, the beehives shattered, and millions of bees poured out like a black tide. The driver, surrounded by bees, tried to call for help, but the mother and daughter inside the truck were screaming in terror. Soon, the driver collapsed, his life hanging in the balance, while the mother and daughter were trapped inside the truck, surrounded by a swarm of bees. What was even more terrifying was that these weren't ordinary honeybees, but highly aggressive killer bees. The mother immediately dialed emergency services. They attempted to drive away, but the bees had blocked the exhaust vents, rendering the vehicle immobile. To make matters worse, both the mother and daughter were allergic to bees, and there was only one dose of adrenaline in the truck. When the fire department arrived, they were stunned by the unprecedented swarm of bees. The scorching heat of the day had made the killer bees even more aggressive, and the driver on the ground had already stopped breathing. Another passenger in the truck was also unconscious. The team members were using carbon dioxide to drive the bees out of the car, but soon they ran out of carbon dioxide, and the bees had blocked the air intake of the water pump, preventing it from pumping water. The team leader immediately requested a foam truck from headquarters, but due to traffic, it would take 20 minutes to arrive. At that moment, a bee flew into the car. At the dispatcher's reminder, Anna closed the ventilation openings in the truck, but it was too late. 3 bees had already flown inside. The dispatcher ordered them to enter the Wooden Man Challenge, but the pesky bees crawled onto the girl's cheek. As one bee was about to enter her eye, the little girl was so scared that she slapped herself, successfully leaving the stinger inside her body. An allergic reaction occurred immediately, and the girl began to struggle to breathe. Her mother quickly injected adrenaline into her daughter's leg, and the girl finally regained her breath. However, just then, another bee stung Anna. She instinctively swatted it away, but it was too late. The adrenaline had already worn off. The dispatcher immediately contacted the rescue team and instructed them to evacuate the mother and daughter as soon as possible. According to the weight of an 8-year-old child, excluding the allergic reaction, she could only withstand 40 to 50 bee stings, so even if rescued, her chances of survival were slim. However, at that moment, another vehicle nearby exploded. At that time, the other driver on the truck had been stung so severely that his face was severely swollen. and a bee was even flying out of his mouth. When the rescue personnel shone a flashlight, a horrifying scene unfolded. The driver's throat was completely blocked by countless bees. The rescue personnel had to use a suction device to clear the airway, sucking the bees out like a vacuum cleaner, and the driver finally regained consciousness. The on-site team members desperately tried to save him, but the situation showed no improvement, and the foam truck was still 8 minutes away. At this critical moment, John noticed that smoke could drive away the bees and immediately used a positive pressure ventilator to blow smoke into the car. However, Anna inside the car was already on the verge of losing consciousness. Fortunately, the dispatcher found through research that there was still some medication left in the syringe and guided Anna to cut open the outer shell, revealing a small syringe inside. But just as she did so, Anna lost consciousness from exhaustion. However, with the dispatcher's encouragement and guidance, the girl bravely injected her mother, and Anna finally regained consciousness. Meanwhile, the team members outside were using smoke to drive away the bees, and this tactic proved effective. The number of bees around the vehicle decreased rapidly, and the team members rushed to rescue the mother and daughter. Just as they managed to rescue them, 15 million bees formed a bee tornado and flew away. They flew eastward across the city sky, with experts tracking them via radar. However, before sunset, the radar signal suddenly disappeared. This did not mean the danger had passed, as killer bees do not act at night. With the temperature dropping, they might simply be seeking a place to rest. The lucky location they chose was the exhibition site, where a new perfume launch event was scheduled for the next day. It must be said that killer bees also have taste. The boss and his assistant were completely unaware of the impending danger, eagerly awaiting the next day. Little did they know that the tent was already swarming with countless bees. The situation the next day was predictable. When the boss sprayed perfume on his assistant to demonstrate it, the bees on the tent roof swarmed out, sending everyone scattering in panic. The most unfortunate one was the assistant, who, due to the perfume's effect, became the bee's pet. In a panic, she jumped into the swimming pool. The boss immediately called 911, but as soon as the assistant stuck her head out of the water, she was attacked by the bees. How could she hold on until the rescue team arrived? Fortunately, Mark acted quickly. With the help of a water hose, the assistant managed to stay underwater for 25 minutes. The situation was critical. John came up with a plan to distract the bees, risking the safety of his teammates. They sprayed the fastest runner, Tom, with perfume and used him as bait to lure the bees away. Tom, fully equipped, rushed outside and ran wildly, finally leading the bees away, and the female assistant was successfully rescued. However, due to multiple stings, the girl had fallen into a coma, and the venom from the stingers was being released every second. It would take at least several hours to remove all the stingers. They came up with the idea of using tape, which proved effective. Not only did it remove the stingers in one go, but it also helped the girl shed her hair, finally bringing her out of danger. Finally, a professional beekeeper arrived late, facing Tom, who was completely covered in bees. The beekeeper used a vacuum cleaner to suck all the bees off his body. However, there were probably only around 100,000 bees there, meaning there were still 14.8 million bees on the loose. Where had they flown to? At that moment, at an altitude of 10,000 meters, Michael was flying his retirement fund destroyer small plane. As he was joking with the air traffic controller, a cloud suddenly appeared ahead. It was the 14 million bees on the loose. Before he could react, the small plane plunged into the swarm. As bees poured in through the ventilation openings, the plane was overrun in an instant. He couldn't control the plane, and by the time he came to his senses, he saw a passenger plane heading straight for him. The passenger plane was already too late to climb, and in an instant, the cockpit was sliced open. The female pilot, who was just about to stand up, was sucked out, but fortunately, a ejection seat blocked the opening. However, the debris scraped the fuselage, and chaos erupted inside the passenger plane. As the oxygen masks dropped, the passengers fell into endless panic. Carter, a police officer, struggled to crawl into the cockpit, but the co-pilot, covered in blood and on the verge of unconsciousness, was using his last ounce of strength to control the plane. After ensuring the plane was in autopilot mode, he finally collapsed and lost consciousness. Carter hurriedly tried to contact the ground control tower but found the radio had failed. Fortunately, her phone still had signal, so she quickly dialed 911 for emergency assistance. The staff transferred her call to air traffic control, who immediately ordered the surrounding airspace to be cleared to ensure the plane could remain safely in the air. Carter temporarily relaxed, returning to the cabin to find the gap above was extremely dangerous. She instructed the flight attendant to move all passengers to the rear of the cabin, as far away from the gap as possible. She then used the intercom to reassure the passengers, urging them to help one another and stay calm. The air traffic control agency called her, instructing her to land the plane safely. Carter was surprised to learn that the agency had contacted a flight instructor named Lisa, who would guide her through the landing procedure. Now, the lives of everyone on board were in Carter's hands, and she felt immense pressure. This was the best option available, and Carter had no other choice. Under the instructor's guidance, she had to complete the task of turning the plane around. But all those buttons were driving her crazy. At a critical moment, a black child pointed something out, and Carter successfully completed the maneuver. However, a new situation arose among the passengers. A little girl's leg had fractured. Under the remote guidance of a ground doctor, the black man first used the luggage handle as a splint. Magazines were used as leg supports. And finally, a tie was used to secure everything. But just then, the girl's leg swelled up even more, turning white below the knee, and she could no longer feel the pulse in her leg. The doctor immediately realized it was compartment syndrome, caused by rising blood pressure blocking blood flow. If the pressure wasn't relieved quickly, the girl's leg would be lost. The situation was critical. They needed to cut open the fascia immediately, but there were no sharp objects on the plane. At that moment, Old Black said he could make a knife using just a toothbrush and a lighter. It turned out he had served time in prison and had experience with such matters. Soon, a makeshift but sharp knife was crafted. Under the doctor's guidance, the man needed to cut approximately 1 centimeter of muscle, like slicing sausage, from below the knee down to the ankle. Though the scene was terrifying, the girl felt significantly better. Meanwhile, another emergency was unfolding. A man was breathing heavily and about to lose consciousness. He was constantly coughing up pink mucus, and the doctor immediately diagnosed it as bloody phlegm. This symptom was likely high-altitude pulmonary edema, with fluid accumulating in his lungs. His condition was critical, and the oxygen mask was no longer effective. They needed a medication that could dilate blood vessels and remove fluid from the lungs, and that drug was sildenafil, commonly used by men with erectile dysfunction. An elderly man slowly raised his hand. The medicine was now available, but how would they administer it to the unconscious man? The doctor asked the girl to find a nebulizer, and the elderly man's partner produced one. They were truly a great help. The girl crushed the tablet into a powder, mixed it with water, and poured it into the nebulizer. She aimed it at the man's mouth and nose, and after a few seconds, he finally regained consciousness. The crisis was slowly being resolved, and the optimistic girl was encouraging everyone. But before she could finish speaking, the gap in the cabin ceiling finally gave way, and countless luggage bags were sucked out. The plane's altitude was rapidly decreasing. At this point, the plane needed to accelerate upward. Under the instructor's guidance, Carter gripped the throttle control stick and pushed it all the way down. Although the nose was gradually lifting upward, the autopilot system would help the plane maintain balance automatically. However, unexpectedly, due to resistance, the autopilot failed. At the critical moment, the young boy took action. He operated the controls while monitoring the instrument panel. Air traffic control, we are parallel to the horizon. Carter looked at the young boy in disbelief, while the passengers had no idea they had just narrowly escaped death. Saved by a child. Ground crew finally breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing the boy's voice, leaving them speechless. Though the immediate crisis was averted, the plane remained at risk of disintegrating at any moment. It needed to land as soon as possible. Just then, the unconscious co-pilot woke up. It was truly a stroke of luck. At that moment, the ground rescue team was rushing toward another life-or-death situation. Derek accidentally crashed into a trash can while driving. Although the vehicle was totaled, he was fortunately unharmed. To be on the safe side, firefighters carried Derek to an ambulance to take him to the hospital for a checkup. Unexpectedly, halfway there, the team discovered a major traffic accident ahead, with several people lying unconscious in pools of blood. Captain Andy immediately contacted the dispatch center to send out Fire Truck 23, but they would need 8 minutes to arrive. Andy saw that the injured were bleeding profusely. With such severe injuries, they wouldn't survive 8 minutes, let alone 3. Andy couldn't hold back any longer and ordered the team to stop and rescue the injured. Teammate Jake stopped him. According to regulations, our mission is to take the man in the ambulance to the hospital. This accident should be handled by Unit 23. But Andy insisted. Human life is at stake. She risked her career by ordering Jake to stay and care for the man while she led her team to begin rescue efforts. Derek also volunteered to assist.
Why don't you take my gurney? They probably need it out there, right? Please, let me help somehow.
The accident scene was horrifying. The driver was critically injured and pronounced dead. Other passengers were thrown from the vehicle, with some suffering fractures and exposed bones, while others were trapped under the car, bleeding heavily. Some had even been impaled by rebar, and the situation had become extremely tense. Just as firefighters had retrieved the emergency supplies from the ambulance, another unexpected incident occurred. The overturned car suddenly sparked, signaling an impending explosion. They dared not delay and quickly divided into 2 teams to control the situation. The others transferred the 6 movable injured to a safe area for treatment and then rushed to rescue the 2 trapped individuals. At this point, the firefighters were overwhelmed, short-handed, and lacking in emergency supplies.
This is the hospital. Station 23, where the hell are you?
Soon, the woman trapped under the car went into shock due to excessive blood loss.
Erratic pulse, clammy skin, I'm afraid of hypervolemic shock. We need to move faster.
I'm going as fast as I can. This metal heats up quick.
However, 2 women were trapped at both ends of the car. making it impossible to lift the vehicle to rescue Jenna. They had to first cut through the rebar piercing Sarah's body. However, the metal generated high temperatures during cutting, forcing them to stop periodically to allow it to cool before continuing. After a tense wait, the rebar was finally severed. Just as they successfully rescued both women, Jenna could no longer hold on. Her heart had stopped beating. Andy immediately switched to CPR mode. Upon hearing the news, the other injured passengers broke down in tears. They were all housewives who had finally managed to take a break from their busy lives to go on a group trip, only to be involved in a tragic accident caused by a drunk driver taking the wrong route. If Jenna didn't survive, what would happen to her children? Fortunately, Andy didn't give up, and with the relentless efforts of the team, they finally pulled her back from the brink of death. It wasn't until then that the 23rd Fire Department finally arrived.
Oh, damn time! You guys are lucky we happen to be passing by. You wouldn't be getting anything but recoveries right now.
Andy and his team successfully rescued the group of mothers, but when she returned to the ambulance, she found that the patient she was responsible for was in trouble. It turned out that Derek had voluntarily given up his stretcher bed, and then his drug addiction kicked in. Derek frantically searched the car for morphine. Jake told Derek that there was only sedatives left, but he was out of control and didn't believe him. Derek's emotions eventually spiraled out of control, and he punched the glass, but his ring got caught on a hook. In his panic, he tore off a piece of flesh. Derek screamed in pain, accusing the firefighters of not taking him to the hospital in time. Although Derek was eventually taken to the hospital and his finger was saved, Andy and the others still got into trouble. Soon after, the chief arrived in a rage to hold Andy accountable for leading the violation of regulations. Fortunately, the firefighters at Station 19 stood united in support of Andy, helping her avoid a career crisis. The next rescue call was waiting to test the limits of these hardcore firefighters. Andy kicked open the door and followed the faint sounds, pushing open another door. Bob was lying on the ground with a metal lampstand piercing his chest. It turned out that Bob had decided to install the chandelier himself to save $100 on installation fees. Unfortunately, Bob slipped and fell, and the lampstand fell on him, piercing his chest. Andy quickly administered N4 to stabilize his condition, then used a saw to remove the excess lampstand parts. Seeing the firefighters begin to bandage the wound, Bob was confused. What about the lamppost? Are you just going to leave it there? Deke explained that the lamppost was blocking a blood vessel, and if they removed it, Bob might bleed to death. The firefighters quickly lifted Bob onto the stretcher, but just as they were about to load him onto the ambulance, Bob suddenly rolled his eyes and fainted. Andy noticed his blood pressure was dropping rapidly. They had to inject epinephrine immediately, and the firefighters scrambled. Finally, after a tense rescue, Bob's vital signs returned to normal. The moment he was lifted onto the stretcher, he opened his eyes. Bob said weakly, "I've been asleep for so long. Why aren't we there yet?" As he spoke, he began to feel sleepy again. Andy and Deke were stunned. What was going on? Time was of the essence, and they had to get him to the hospital immediately. However, as soon as they stepped out the door, the monitor emitted a sharp alarm. Bob's blood pressure plummeted again, and his breathing stopped abruptly. Andy had no choice but to stop and perform another round of resuscitation. After intubation to assist breathing, Bob's condition finally stabilized. They put him in the ambulance and rushed to the hospital as fast as they could. At that moment, they were only 6 minutes away from the nearest hospital. If they could just make it through those 6 minutes, their mission would be accomplished. However, unexpectedly, halfway there, Bob's condition deteriorated again. It turned out he was in ventricular fibrillation. Andy was about to lose his mind. He quickly attached the electrodes and activated the defibrillator. After 4 rounds of defibrillation, the man still showed no signs of recovery. With no other options, Deke had no choice but to pull over urgently and perform CPR on Bob. However, after performing CPR for a while, not only did Bob's condition not improve, but his injuries worsened. It turned out that the area where Bob had been stabbed was bleeding, and each chest compression was forcing blood out of his body, accelerating his death. Andy was deeply concerned. What should they do? Just as they were at a loss, Deke made a bold decision. "We have to pull out the pole from the wound." Andy's face turned pale at the suggestion, as this could cause Bob to bleed to death on the spot. But Deke was resolute. To save Bob, they had to take the risk. Finally, Andy relented, and now they could only pray that the risky move would succeed. Deke carefully pulled out the lamppost, and a flood of blood gushed out. He grabbed piece after piece of gauze to plug the wound, then pressed down firmly on the injury. As time ticked by, a miracle occurred. The bleeding stopped, and Bob's heartbeat returned to normal. The two men erupted in joy. They had succeeded. The ambulance set off again, and fortunately, in the remaining 3 minutes, Bob did not experience any further complications. They arrived at the hospital safely, having narrowly avoided disaster. As they handed Bob over to the doctors, Andy and Deke's tense nerves finally relaxed. It was a relief. This operation was truly the work of a rescue team that treats life and death as routine.